Chris Bumstead and Ramon Dino, the two bodybuilders who currently raise the most expectation. They have formed the biggest rivalry in recent years, certainly since the time of Phil Heath and Kai Green, despite being different categories. And it is that after a few years in which the main category of bodybuilding had left us without charismatic idols, entering a stage of decline compared to previous years. That is where the figure of Chris Bumstead emanates in a new category made to revive the physiques of the classic era. Physiques that on paper represented a very different standard from what open bodybuilding had become. This allowed physiques that showed less muscle mass to reach the big stage. But in this context emerges the figure of a young Brazilian with a life completely different from that of Chris Bumstead. But that fate would end up putting them side by side. Chris Bumstead's life seemed predestined to turn him into a bodybuilder. His sister was a competitor, and his brother-in-law, Ian Valier, was already a bodybuilder who was beginning to battle it out with the best in the world. At the age of 21, he had already set his whole life on the road to bodybuilding. He had emerged as a young prodigy, called to be among the best at a very young age. And so much so that in the year 2007 and shared the stage with Durham Charles and Ruth Diesel among others, fighting for a pass to the Minister Olympia and of course getting. At the same time, in 2017, Ramon Dino was not even professionally dedicated to the gym yet. He led a life in Brazil, far away from the media spotlight, but with the genetics that could already be seen at that time. It is known to many that Ramon Dino's resources at that time were not much. However, he opted and ended up deciding to change the Galistenia Parks for a bodybuilding stage with his first trainer. This would lead them to their first championships until deciding to go out to an amateur Olympia minister in Brazil, but this time with the option and possibilities of becoming a professional bodybuilder in case of winning that championship that did end up winning and starting in that 2018 the legacy of one of the best bodybuilders classy today. But let's look at the paradigm of bodybuilding that meanwhile Chris Bumstead, with only 22 years, was already preparing to show for the second time on the stage of the Minister Olympia, this time even as a contender to take the title against Brian Astley. All this was happening while Ramon Dino was not yet known by anyone. He was clearly without resources in his hometown of Acre, Brazil, with a very humble life while he was still preparing in his small town. But seeing the lack of opportunities, even as a professional bodybuilder, he took an action that would be the beginning of his more mediatic career. This local man opens the doors for him to participate in a media show on the internet that a priori had no relation to fitness. However, he stands out for his physique, attracts the attention of the audience and especially of the man who would end up sponsoring him. This local man, Renato Cariani, one of the main fitness exponents in Brazil, owner of multiple companies, competitor, and who decides to help Ramon Dino to boost his competitive career. Moved by his history and also, it must be said, by his genetics. This makes Ramon Dino even more known in social networks, mainly in Brazil. This happened in 2020, and meanwhile, a year earlier in 2019, with this physical version here, Chris Bumstead now really impacted the whole world of bodybuilding. Many were already beginning to see him as the true standard that should represent the bodybuilding world. So while Ramon Dino was still on the streets of Brazil, Chris Bumstead in 2019 was winning his first Mr. Olympia in this new category that was going to end up generating much more expectation than anyone could imagine. But the interesting part of this story begins at this moment. The moment when Ramon Dino is about to make his debut as a professional bodybuilder in classic fishing. We are in the year 2020, and no, back then Ramon Dino was not yet all the media he is today. Expectations were beginning to be high in Brazil, but he was still a complete unknown to fans internationally. Let's remember that Ramon Dino a couple of years ago was still jumping from the calisthenics parks to the gym as such, and this is when, with an excited and nervous Renato Cariani all the way to this professional show in Alicante, Ramon Dino sets his first foot on a professional stage looking like this. It was hard at the time to know the meteoric rise that awaited him because he was competing with bodybuilders like Fabian Omer and Madelman. However, after that round of pre-aging, they confirmed that he would indeed be in the top 3 in his professional debut. What was supposed to be a mere debut turns out to be a 3-way battle. Madelman on the left, Fabian Omer in the middle and Ramon Dino on the right were fighting for a place in the Mr. Olympia, which would go to the top two finishers. And that's how they ended up rotating Ramon Dino to the center before a comparative that did not make us clear who was going to be the winner of that afternoon. But that only with that entry in the top three excited the young Ramon Dino and all his staff for being there and seeing possible to get his pass to the Olympia. The comparative rounds would continue in finals before the judges gave a verdict to which Renato Cariani and company would end up reacting like this.
Caralho, mano de Deus, velho! Brasil, Ramon Olha quem chegou! Próxima parada no dia! Olympia no Brasileiro! Pelo amor de Deus! O melhor de todos. Primeira vez num evento como esse. Olha o nível do evento.
All this was happening while Chris Bumstead was coming to show his best Olympia version of the category, and which neither Rough Diesel nor Brian Aslay looked like they could get close to. That year the battle was not against Brian Aslay but directly against Rough Diesel, resulting in this. Chris Bumstead had already earned the recognition of the bodybuilding world, knowing that he could start a dynasty that no one would stop. And is that the superiority with the rest of the competitors was such that much would have to change things to not repeat the feat the following year, and it is true, things were not very different. The following year, but competitors such as Ramon Dino, who also the same year he turned professional, was already battling in the top 6 competitors of the Olympia, entered the scene. No one could have expected the Brazilian to be in that lineup with the best, nor could he himself have believed such a rapid ascent. Few would have known in that year of the Olympia that the number 16 who would cross in front of Chris Bumstead, who would throw him this look from here, would end up becoming his greatest rival and the man with whom he would make headlines in the following years to come. Even so, Chris Bumstead certifies that 3 consecutive championships. He won the 3rd Mr. Olympia, but unlike the previous ones, now it seemed that there were competing rivals who were also emerging as he had emerged in his day. Ramon Dino would not stop on his way and would win the following professional championships. He would prove that what happened was not mere luck by winning the muscle contest in Brazil, but above all, he would do it in the Arnold Classic, achieving a 2nd place only behind Rough Diesel, who had been Chris Bumstead's direct rival. Then yes, Ramon Dino had proved that he was already a reality. In a couple of years, he jumped from the streets of Brazil to become Chris Bumstead's main rival. There is no bodybuilder who moves more people than Chris Bumstead. The classic physique category began to generate an expectation that it did not generate before, and now the IFBB seemed to have found its 2 visible faces. Ramon Dino and Chris Bumstead, 2 completely different stories of life, but worth the redundancy had given life to this new Mr. Olympia. The debate became between the 2 of them. Expectations were placed on them, and so much so that it ended up certifying that 1-to-1 battle, a dual one against the other in the Mr. Olympia of 2022. This time there was no one else, just the Canadian bodybuilder and the Brazilian. Post to post, they measured each other, showing Ramon Dino an advance that was already unstoppable. Both came out in a very remarkable condition, with very similar structures. No one until now had competed with the Chris Bumstead Prime as closely as Ramon Dino did this year, 2023. There were 5 poses: the double biceps, the side chest, where Chris Bumstead was always much more compact and enviable condition. The double back biceps, where Chris Bumstead had always been unbeatable and it seemed impossible to beat him, but Ramon Dino with that condition gave him war. This made that after a long time in a Mr. Olympia with so much expectation, we saw again one of those rivalries that the fans miss so much, and with this last pose, the Priaji would end. However, Chris Bumstead would end up certifying the victory in that Olympia 2022 with a Ramon Dino who also looked proud of the feat he had just done, but knowing that the real battle would be in the 2023. This time a Ramon Dino with a different tone, a physique already much more similar to that structure so characteristic of Chris Bumstead, to which it seemed impossible to get close. Well, this year the poses became even tighter. The double biceps backstroke, an impossible subject for Ramon, seemed to be getting closer this year. Ramon Dino showed a complete physique in all the poses. Everything looked better in Ramon Dino, but here the question is that this was not going to be enough to dethrone a king who would be crowned again for the 5th consecutive time, treasuring all the history of this category that thanks to the descent of Ramon Dino had become closer, more tight, to the point of sowing doubt in the spectator if he will be able to maintain that physical and unpolluted Chris Bumstead against a Ramon Dino who has already put Chris Bumstead between the ropes. And it is this type of rivalry that opens the expectations for what we all expect in just a few weeks. Will Chris Bumstead be able to keep up with the new contenders to the throne that go unchecked for this new year? How far is the real hunger of a competitor who has already done it all? Will Ramon Dino be able to give that extra to his physique that he lacks to beat the one who has not yet been able to? We only have 3 weeks left to find out. But the doubt is even bigger when in the last Arnold Classic Wesley Vissers overtakes everyone by the right hand side, taking an Arnold Classic that many of us could expect that it was going to be for Ramon Dino. Where does this leave Ramon Dino? What will happen if he can bring his best? What if Wesley Vissers comes in like he did at the Arnold Classic? And can Chris Bumstead really lose the championship this year if he doesn't come in perfect condition against the new contenders? These are all questions that we will answer in just 3 weeks in the Mr. Olympia that of course we will cover here on the channel, and I hope you have your popcorn ready for everything that is to come. And with that said, a greeting, a hug, and your partner Dibrah says goodbye.